I don't practice Santeria, ain't got no crystal ball. Had $1 million and I spent it all. Well, I was trying to play that Sublime song and it just wouldn't come through. So I had to just break down and sing it to you. But just of a personal note, I did practice Santeria. I used to have a crystal ball, but I never had $1 million so I could spend it all. This is Maris, and I'm coming to you on this episode of Confessions of an Eclectic Healer. I believe it's episode number 8. And this is Dancing with the Devil Will Always Get You Burned. Voice of Experience. You know, throughout the years, I've kind of wavered back and forth in between being a Christian and then practicing non-Christian practices or beliefs, etc., whatever way you want to go with it. And then sometimes I've been kind of there in that mystic in between. And I guess that's kind of where I am right now, in that mystical world of the more magical Christ, or the energetic vibrational healing Christ, as opposed to the hellfire and damnation kind of Christian. I don't really buy into the hellfire and damnation if I'm supposed to believe that my God is a merciful God, right? Well, you know, I kind of wavered back and forth throughout my years in between, do I follow God by the principles of Christ, or how I was raised, or am I allowed to embrace or embark on that path of something that is that Scripture tells us is wrong, like fortune telling and prophets and soothsayers and magical amulets and talisman and etc. And you know, and I see that there is something in both worlds, and not a lot of people understand that if they're on that very far extreme either way. So I find that Christians often balk at me and are what I'm going to call the more hardcore of it. And then I also have the more hardcore aspect, or the far aspect, on the polytheism, or the magical mysticals, you know, the ones that are looking outside the Christian philosophies at life, that they balk at me as well. So somewhere in between is where I am, but I've experienced both sides. And so I look at this journey that you're on, that I'm on, that we're on, is that we're going to figure out at some point what really fits for us and what path are we really on. And I'm just, my only piece of advice is be of love and light. It's so much easier to live in light and live by love and harmony than it is to embrace anything other. And so in my early years, you remember, I don't know if you remember, but, you know, my mother had kind of left this book and was the one that turned me on to many of the things of the magical, mystical world. And even though she and I never really had a direct conversation about any of that, which was really kind of interesting that we didn't ever have a really direct conversation about why she had witchcraft books and etc. It was just pretty much that those books were left out there, and I chose to read them and in some ways embrace them, in many ways not embrace them. Uh, you cannot practice anything on a magical realm and be willy-nilly about it. You have to really take into consideration that you are using frequencies and vibrations, and you're sending this information, you know, across the world sometimes, you know, in through the universe. And so there's going to be a lot of attachment that you're involved with when you practice what I'm going to call willy-nilly magic. And I have a couple of stories to share with you in my confessions today. And one of them was I was working at a grocery store, and mind you, at this time, I'm doing a lot of hardcore magic. Lots of hardcore magic. I've lost my job. I was a restaurant manager, made some inappropriate choices, lost my job, and I'm working at a grocery store. I even worked at some point. I worked in the bakery making donuts. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? And the lady that I was working with, she was my boss, and to tell you, I can tell you what she looks like, but I couldn't remember her name, so let's just call her Susie. And so Susie does this reading for me. I have this crush, this major crush on this guy, and we'll just call him Ricky. And Ricky's really, really, really cute in my eyes. Hindsight or foresight is always blurry. And in hindsight, Ricky wasn't that hot, and he was actually kind of like a bum. But, that when you're young and silly, you make a lot of inappropriate choices. So anyway, she does this reading for me, and it's this really interesting board reading, and it's called Osiris. And it's actually out of the Pressman Company, but they no longer make this fortune-telling game called Osiris. But it was really amazing, and it was, in hindsight, it was on point. Anyway, so she does this reading for me, and she tells me that Ricky is not for me, not good. It will not work out. And I'm like, oh, but I love Ricky. I was adamant that I love this guy. And so what I ended up doing was I get together this little spell, and I've talked about this spell before, and it's where you take a flower bulb and a little pot, with soil, and you put the flower bulb in the soil, and that flower bulb becomes the object of your affection. And so I'm setting up this little spell that I'm going to do. And I've got the bulb, and I stick it in the dirt, and I get this call from the landlady's husband, and actually we're doing some little sideline stuff of, not he and I are not doing some sideline stuff, but so I'm talking to him. It has something to do about repairing a door or whatever in my house or in my apartment. And because he was also the maintenance man. And so I go back to the spell, but I'm still thinking about this man, the maintenance guy, who's the landlady's husband. Let's just include that in there. All right, so long story short, I'm over here and I'm doing this spell. And you water this bulb, and as you water it, and you water it twice a day, and you're like, as this root grows and this blossom blows, may his or her heart be turned to me, and my will, so mote it be. Now with the intention in here that the person that you named this bulb after, which I named it after Tricky Ricky, right? And it's in the dirt. Well, I'm thinking about the landlady's husband that I just talked to on the phone in the middle of doing or preparing this spell. And the next thing you know, Tricky Ricky calls to tell me how much he hates me. And then I got the landlady's husband peeping in the windows. What the hell? You cannot practice willy-nilly magic and not expect some kind of consequence. Just as in the real world, you cannot set out a vibration of something half-but and expect to get fantastic results on it. What you have manifesting in your brain or in your thoughts is what you're going to connect in with frequency and vibration, and that's what you receive. All right, so let's move ahead, probably about a year and a half-ish from this point, and I'm not in a good place. Oh my gosh, I'm just like totally not in a good place. I'm pregnant with my second kid. The father of baby number two has left me, and I meet this guy, and I think that he is just marvelous. And he treats me like a princess. Treats me like a princess. And so I call him right before I have my second child. And he's kind of acting kind of weird. And I'm like, that's cool, that's fine. And I just kind of hang up and I go my own way. I see him, about a month later. And, you of course, you're no longer pregnant. You're really pretty slender and looking good. And he calls me up and we start seeing each other. But I always get this feeling like there's something that, he's not 100% honest with me or 100% connected. Let's use that phrase, not 100% connected with me. And so at this time, I'm dabbling around in some Santeria. And I do a couple of little Santeria love spells, or love, they're called hechos. And the next thing you know, he's all about me. And so we're dating and, we start getting really serious and a couple of months go by and it's right around Christmas time. And wow. He calls me up and he tells me that he's in jail up in a town that's probably about 90 minutes or so away. So I have to go to his brother's house that's like 45 minutes away in the other direction, go get some money from his brother, and then I go up to this town and I go to the jail and to go pick him up. Well, they're going to let me ride in the elevator to go up and get him, which I thought was kind of strange, but hey, it's cool. And so we go up there and where I'm kind of like giggly in the elevator, and ends up he got pulled over with no ID. And so they impounded his truck, or actually they left his truck on the side, but they took him to jail and I had to go pick him up. All right, so anyway, I go in there and I'm going up this elevator and the doors open and he gets on the elevator and I'm like really, really kind of happy to see him. And I, we kind of like embrace for a second and I pull back and I see all these hickeys on his neck. And I flip out in the elevator and they're like, whoa, you cannot hit him. And I'm like, whoa, he cheated on me. And so they kind of stood there for a moment, the doors open and we leave and, they want to make sure that we're going to be okay. And I'm like, yeah, we'll be okay. And on the way back, I guess he decides that he's going to propose to me. And this is how young and confused I am. And under the guise of, and remember that during this time I'm practicing a lot of magic. And when you dance with the devil, you will get burned. When you dance with the devil, you will get burned. All right, so he asked me to marry him during this time, and I guess I kind of sort of agree or whatever. And then I get home, and I'm telling you, I am like throwing tons of magic. I'm going to bind him to where, he's going to be faithful, and I'm going to light these candles because we're going to get married. And I'm doing all of these different hechos. I'm taking baths with milk and honey, and you name it, I'm doing it. Because this is where I'm going to be, right? we do get married, and right after we get married, I get pregnant, and then after I deliver, after we have our son, I find out he's got another son that's a month older than our son. So again, he's been completely unfaithful to me, and I'm having to do a lot of magic. So I spend the next several years doing a lot of magic. Because once you start this cascade of doing a spell on someone and taking away their free will, you end up having to battle that uphill in order to maintain that. So when I start looking at the current events in the news, such as the Nexium trial and Allison Mack, and I know that they're not technically satanic, maybe they're doing some sort of magic, I don't know. Kind of mind magic, the manipulation that they did. And then you look at what's currently in the news, Jerry Epstein. And the many, many, many rumors or stories that surround Jerry Epstein are about the beginnings of creating or doing some magic in order to create an effect. And that resulted in having to constantly being in a state of magic to try to stay ahead of the game. I get it. I totally get it. But at some point, you have a breaking point that you have to dissociate from that and get back into a path or a sense of the light where free will becomes a person's own choice, and you can no longer manipulate somebody else's free will for your own good. I spent many years in that marriage, again, constantly in a state of having to do spells. And once I stopped, and I actually did stop doing any kind of magic, and I began practicing Reiki, and then I also embraced back into my Catholic faith and went back to the church. And it was during this time that I had a metamorphosis. The Reiki was there, totally insulating my spirit so that I did not have a horrific reaction to it, to change. We don't like horrific reactions to change. But I actually weathered through a divorce very well with my 3 kids. We left in a state of Hades, but were able to recoup and get back into the light. So on my next episode, we'll go a little bit deeper into this and how I went through a path of disconnecting from what was holding me back in bondage and found the ability to embrace a little bit of light. If you'd like to reach out to us, feel free to contact us at our email, getconnected287@gmail.com, or on our Facebook page, Oklahoma Healing Connection. Have a most awesome evening.